Welcome along to Eye on Africa, our daily look across the continent here on France 24. Our main stories. The United Nations is to pull its 13,000 peacekeepers out of Mali by the year's end at the behest of the country's military rulers. It comes a year after France pulled its troops out and leaves Russia's poorly equipped Wagner mercenary group to contend with the jihadist insurgency. And we head to Cameroon and the far north region where drinking water is a rare commodity. Our reporters will be taking a look at several initiatives by the Cameroon Red Cross aimed at providing water for thousands of locals and livestock. It's good to have you along with us. I'm James Mulholland. First up, the United Nations has voted to end its decade-old peacekeeping mission in Mali. The UN Security Council's decision comes 2 weeks after Mali's military leadership accused the 13,000-strong Minusma force of failing to tackle a jihadist insurgency. In August last year, France withdrew its troops from Mali. That reopened a security vacuum, which allowed Russia's mercenary group Wagner to step in. Caroline Lambolet tells us more.
Please raise their hand.
It marks the end of the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, known as Minusma.
Result of the voting
On Friday, the UN Security Council unanimously adopted the resolution, but many representatives made it clear that they had done so reluctantly.
While we deeply regret the transition government's decision to abandon Minusma and the harm this will bring to the Malian people, we voted in favor of this resolution as we are ultimately satisfied with the drawdown plan this Council has just adopted.
Some went even further.
We do not believe that partnership with the Wagner Group will deliver long-term stability or security.
Russia, on the other hand, hailed the vote, saying it was a response to Mali's sovereign decision requesting the UN peacekeepers to leave the country.
The withdrawal process of Minusma will start on July 1st and end on December 31st, 2023. The government of the Republic of Mali is attached to the commitments that were made in this regard and will make sure they are respected. The Malian government is open to cooperating with all partners who wish to do so.
Minusma was created in 2013 after separatist rebels and extremist insurgents occupied northern Mali. But since then, the authorities have drastically reduced the scope of the UN mission. The Malian government says it has failed to bring security after 10 years in the country.
Minusma was described as the United Nations' deadliest mission in the world, with more than 170 peacekeepers killed in Mali over the past decade. The decision to end it comes weeks after a report by the world body which alleged that 500 civilians had been killed by Malian forces alongside what was described as foreign mercenaries, which is understood to be an allusion to Wagner forces. Well, to discuss the implications of the UN's pullout from Mali, we're now joined by Paul Malley, Consulting Fellow of the Africa Programme at Chatham House. Mr. Malley, thanks very much for joining us. What legacy does Minusma leave as it wraps up its operations in Mali? Was it successful?
I think it was significantly successful in two respects. We tend to forget that back in the early days of the Mali crisis, there was a separatist uprising in the north of the country, largely by the Tuareg people in the Sahara, and then a peace agreement in 2015. And a big part of the UN's job was to try and bring that peace agreement into effect, if you like. And that sort of helped develop decentralization measures and try and prevent any resurgence of that particular factor. But at the same time, you had the terrorism crisis, and the Malian government appears to be implying that Minusma, the UN force, failed to tackle the jihadist terrorist movements. But that was never really their mandate. They were trying to protect civilians and provide basic services across the whole of northern Mali, which is a huge area. But the actual anti-terrorism fight was largely entrusted either to the Malian army or to the French forces, who withdrew last year after their own disagreements with the military government in Bamako. So it's a slightly false criticism, if you like, to say that the UN failed to curb the terrorist movements.
As you say, a large part of their brief was protecting civilians. So what does this pullout now mean for them, for civilians, in particular those in more remote areas?
Well, it leaves them very vulnerable because the UN force has something like 10 bases largely scattered across the north, in cities like Kidal in the Sahara, like Gao, the main northern center, like Menaka, the capital of the most isolated region in the far northeast. And these are places that are under direct security threat in many cases from jihadists. And there are two jihadist movements that are both fighting against the official security forces, but sometimes fighting each other. And civilians are often the casualties in that. And the UN has been a basic sort of stabilizing presence, allowing the continuation of basic humanitarian services, providing a measure of protection for civilians. And it's very difficult to see how Wagner, as a relatively small number of Russian mercenary fighters, not really trained in peacekeeping or that sort of stabilization work, how they would fulfill that role. And the Malian army is already very stretched.
It's a very interesting point that you mentioned there. The size and the equipment of the Wagner forces very much coming into question. But with the pullout of French troops and now Minusma, does it essentially give the Wagner group free rein? And is this dangerous in your view?
Well, it does give it free rein to some extent, but the constraints may be simply the scale of the vast challenge in Mali. The country is one of the largest in Africa. A large part of the north is desert. The operating conditions, as your visual images are showing, are extremely tough. And this is the mission that has been the deadliest in the history of UN peacekeeping, almost 200 peacekeepers killed. And so that's a task that Wagner, which won't have the same level of equipment and won't have the same level of backup that until last year, the French forces, who were themselves also backed up by, for example, US satellite intelligence surveillance, could provide. So when it comes to, for example, the evacuation of casualties by helicopters or planes, the UN operation, especially when it was backed by the French, had a level of capacity that it's very hard to imagine Wagner matching. And also the culture of Wagner, of course, is quite different. It's a mercenary operation. It's really a fighting outfit, and with a very troubled human rights record.
Okay, Mr. Malley, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have to leave it there. Paul Malley, Consulting Fellow of the Africa Programme at Chatham House. Many thanks.
Good evening. Thank you.
This is Eye on Africa. Let's now take a look at some of the other stories making headlines across the continent. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has been cleared of wrongdoing in a scandal involving the theft of more than $500,000 from his game farm. The country's anti-corruption watchdog said it found no evidence of a potential conflict of interest, nor that Ramaphosa had violated his oath of office in the affair, in which piles of US currency stashed in a couch were stolen. The incident raised questions about how the president acquired the money and nearly cost him his job. The United States has lifted some restrictions on Ethiopia, citing an improvement on human rights. The White House said the situation had improved since a November ceasefire agreement between Ethiopia's government and forces in the northern Tigray region. The deal ended 2 years of fighting that killed tens of thousands, with millions displaced and hundreds of thousands facing hunger. The US has maintained a freeze on food aid to Ethiopia amid claims it was being diverted from people in need. Kenya has announced a hike in fuel prices despite a court order to halt the implementation of a raft of new taxes. Authorities said prices would rise from Saturday, and it comes as Kenya grapples with a severe cost of living crisis. It comes also amid reports that the President William Ruto, along with his deputy and other officials, are to get a hefty pay raise. According to a report seen by AFP, they're due to get a 14% salary hike along with other bonuses. And finally, we head to Cameroon in the north, the far north region, an arid region where drinking water is a rare commodity. The Cameroon Red Cross has been working to find solutions to provide water for thousands of locals and livestock. Our team in Dugmo tells us about their initiatives.
In Cameroon's far north region, water is hard to come by for both people and livestock. 75-year-old Abba has been a herder since she was 10. Today, her herd is drinking at a specially built watering point. About 2,000 head of cattle drink here every day. Abba is delighted at no longer having to travel dozens of kilometers in search of a borehole.
Before, we had to travel long distances to get our cattle to drink. Some of them even died on the way. Now that we can make them drink here, everything's fine. We're very happy.
These water truths for animals are part of a project by the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, in the village of Dugmo in the district of Makari. The borehole has a capacity of 5 cubic meters, and the team operating it says its installation has reduced inter-community conflict in a region often hit by attacks from Boko Haram extremists.
Given the lack of water, especially in the dry season, some herders travel several miles. While traveling, they move across farmlands destroying crops. Conflicts arise between herders and the owners of destroyed farms. The ICRC therefore carried out the supply project through solar pumping.
Led by their traditional ruler, hundreds of inhabitants of Dogmo who've come to welcome an ICRC delegation say the boreholes made a huge difference in their quality of life.
In the past, children had to walk under the sun to fetch water. With water now at our doorsteps, we no longer have problems.
15,000 people currently benefit, but the ICRC is hoping to launch similar installations in Mokolo in the Mayo Chanaga division, targeting 80,000 people.
And that's it from us here on Eye on Africa. The international headlines are up next on France 24. Do stay with us.